Thank you all for coming. The less important person in this kind of event gets the longer intro, which was me. So I'm going to do a shorter one of the man we're here to hear from. He is a 43-year veteran of the New York Police Department, the longest serving police commissioner in New York City, a Vietnam vet, the former Undersecretary of Treasury, and most recently, the author of this book, Vigilance, My Life Serving America and Protecting Its Empire City. Of course, he will be signing this book at the end of the event. And a man that I'm proud to call a friend, Ray Kelly.
Thank you, sir.
Sir. So what I'm going to try and do is bounce a little bit between questions about current events and questions about the book. So let's start easy, soft. Are you running for mayor? Because I was at your book party, all right? And all anyone was talking about at the book party was, well, you know, this is the precursor to 2007.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So are you running for mayor?
No, I'm honored when people mention that, but I have no plans to run for office. Never say never, but...
Depends on how things go. We'll come back to those sort of political issues. I just wanted to start it off slow and easy. What led you to write the book? What inspired? I mean, you know, I heard you say at one point that writing this book was harder than you would have thought.
Yeah.
What inspired you to do it?
Well, I think I've been blessed with a lot of unique opportunities and experiences, and in there, I think interwoven a lot of lessons. As you said in your introduction, I was in the NYPD for 43 years. I was the commissioner twice. I worked in the federal government in the Clinton administration. I was Undersecretary, Customs Commissioner, Vietnam, Haiti, Interpol. I felt I had something to memorialize, you might say. Plus, all of my predecessors have written books. And as you said, I was the longest-serving police commissioner. So, hey,
you got to do it, right? Yeah, there's an obligation there.
All right.
Let me come back to current events, because I do want to sort of flip back between the two. You know, a lot of your book talks about the post-9/11 world and how you were in the center of that. And I think that so many of us who live in New York have been pleasantly surprised that there hasn't been a major terror attack in New York since 9/11. Is that because of good policing, luck, or just low-level incompetence who've been trying it?
I think probably a little bit of those three things. No question about it, New York is still the #1 target in the United States. Financial capital, cultural capital, media capital. We say terrorism is theater. New York is the world's biggest stage in many ways. So they want to come back here. In the book, we talk about 16 plots that took place in New York City on Mike Bloomberg's.
How many of those serious, though? You know, you use the term like 16 plots. How many of those would you say were developed to the point where, you know, this was getting close? We stopped them pretty close here.
Well, they're all serious, but obviously there's one that we didn't stop. And that was Faisal Shahzad, who drove right into Times Square May 1st, 2010, and attempted to blow up a bomb that he was instructed how to make in Pakistan, made out of propane tanks, fertilizer, and firecrackers. It would have worked, except that he dumbed it down. He was concerned about his appearance. He thought that if he was openly purchasing some fairly potent material, such as M80 firecrackers, that he would become a suspect. Some people would question him. So what he did was to buy M88 firecrackers, which have much less potency. Fertilizer, the same thing. You reach a certain level of fertilizer that has to be registered with the federal government. He intentionally reduced that. As a result, it didn't go off. It sort of went poof, and he walked away thinking that it was going to work. But we knew nothing about him. He wasn't on anybody's radar screen. He was a naturalized citizen, went to Pakistan. Like many of the people plotting against the U.S., he was incensed over the Abu Ghraib atrocities, if you will, and that was his motivator. But he in a way, almost get away.
Let me ask, there's controversy sometimes in the media, for example, about discussing someone's motivation, right? You said his motivation was Abu Ghraib. Does it matter what a terrorist's motivation is? Meaning, in retrospect, we talk about mass killings, we talk about shooters who kill people at schools, and sometimes people say, look, I don't care what their motivation was. I don't even want to talk about their motivation because I don't want to give them that. Does it matter? I guess it matters for the policing part of it, right?
No, it's just really sort of a matter of curiosity. I mean, the threat is the threat. He confessed this.
Right.
And you'll see this in many of these cases. They give it all up because they're proud of what they did. They think they've failed, but they've done a good thing. They've tried. They're getting an A for effort.
In the post 9/11 world, I remember, as someone just, in the media and on the outside, there was a new rumor every week about don't ride the subways this week or tomorrow, next Wednesday, don't do this. And constantly there were these sort of rumors and speculation about the next attack coming. Was any of this based on real intelligence, or was this more just people gossiping?
Well, I think both. I think people were concerned. If you think about the immediate aftermath of 9/11, there was an awful lot of gloom and doom in the media. Mm-hmm. There was a prediction that another terrorist attack was imminent. It wasn't a question of if, just a question of when it was going to happen. And oh, by the way, crime was going to go up. Mayor Giuliani, who did a very effective job of fighting crime, reducing crime, was leaving. So there was just bad news, and that sort of fed, I think, a lot of the rumors. Now, some of it was also chatter. You hear that term chatter, but it's very hard to get your arms around because it's disjointed, it's contradictory. People going into chat rooms and picking up pieces of.
Were you guys getting the chatter, or was it the FBI? I mean, I assume there was a lot more sharing right after 9/11.
It depends on what time frame you're talking about, because we were not configured to get that information, before the Bloomberg administration kicked in. And I was able to recruit top flight professional commissioners to help me. And one was David Cohn. David was the only person to be the director of operations and the director of analysis in the Central Intelligence Agency, 35 years in the CIA. He did a terrific job. I wanted a Marine general to be in charge of our counterterrorism efforts. Why did I want that? I wanted it because I had spent a lot of time in the Marine Corps, regular and reserves, had a lot of respect for him. And I thought that persona, sort of that template that I put together, would sort of hold off any resistance that would develop in the department from having civilian executives come in and sort of direct the operations of uniform officers.
What was I mean, we kept hearing afterwards that there was a lot of problems with cooperation among the various organizations. That the CIA had information, the FBI had information, NYPD, and people weren't talking to each other. In the months after 9/11, did that immediately improve, or did it take a while to get the whole system functioning better?
Well, it took a while. If you read the 9/11 report, you'll see that was the crux of the problem. The CIA was not communicating to the FBI. They knew of two of the hijackers coming into the country. They simply didn't communicate that. So you had to work that out. I think the reality was after 9/11 that no agency really wanted to be caught holding the bag. If you had some information, you wanted to pass it along because you didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, I think it's a real world motivator as far as sharing information is concerned. But there was, without a doubt, a lot more sharing, a lot more interaction. Now, the vehicle to do that was the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Now over 100 JTTFs, as they're called, in U.S. cities. Even some, I think, now are overseas. Basically, it is an FBI-run entity. It's sort of like a jug, that's the FBI, with refrigerator magnets on the side of the agencies, the other agencies. Now, in New York, we increased the number of NYPD people in the Joint Terrorism Task Force from 17 on 9/11 to 120, and that's where it is today. So that's 120 New York City detectives, mostly seasoned investigators, working with the FBI. So that is the means of sharing information.
On a 1 to 10 scale, and let's assume 1 is great, 5 is really great, and 10 is the best mayor ever, where does Mayor DeBlasio fit on that?
I'm not going to, I think he has to finish a term. I mean, I think Mayor Bloomberg did a terrific job, because I think it's important to put everything he did in the perspective of taking office 3.5 months after 9/11. And you look at where the city was at the end of his third term. I think he did a phenomenal job, and we were very fortunate to have someone like him in that position.
Has the police department done anything since you left that you think has been a good thing? Has there been any good change? Because we'll talk about the bad change in a minute. But has there been any good change in the police department, do you think, since you left?
I'm not 100% certain, because I don't focus on it every day. I think there were good people that were moved out and forced to retire, which was a mistake. And I think it's something that unfortunately happens when administrations change. In the police department, you don't expect that to happen, because it really is a profession, and you're not there as a result of politics. So I think it was unnecessary to move people out. They're going to do their job irrespective of who the mayor is or who the commissioner is.
You say in the book, I think it's the first line of one of your chapters, is Mayor DeBlasio ran against the police.
Well, he did. And in 2013, that was his campaign, one of his campaign keystones, was that there was a schism, a divide between the police and the communities that the police department serves, largely driven by stop, question, and frisk. His campaign started, let's say in January of 2013, or started before that, when the police department had a 70% approval rating, when I had a 75% approval rating. I say that not to brag, but to demonstrate that there was no significant split or divide. You're always going to have some friction between the police and the community. Why? Because what we ask police to do. They're the bearers of bad news. They are authorized to use force, to use deadly force, to give summonses. So, it's not an easy task, but you constantly have to work at interacting and trying to improve the relations with the community. But I don't remember, other than immediately after 9/11, when the department had that high of an approval rating. But what Mayor DeBlasio did was ran against the police, ran against Mayor Bloomberg, ran against me. Even though Joe Lodo was the opposition, he ran against the previous administration, and it worked.
But why did it? But if it worked, why did it work then? I mean, if there was such great support for the previous administration, then why did it work?
Very low voter turnout. People didn't vote. He parsed the electorate. He went, obviously, in New York, we have almost a 6-to-1 Democratic majority. If you win the primary, absent a Mike Bloomberg, Rudy Giuliani, if you win the primary, you're going to be mayor, Democratic mayor. And what he did was go right to the extremes, the sort of activist community, you might say. They voted, and they put him over the 40% hurdle, and the election had the lowest turnout since 1917. So that was the rules, and he operated under the rules, but it was a fact, certainly in my opinion, that he ran against the department.
You talk about in your book, the criticism of stop and frisk, of course, and worked its way through the courts, et cetera, is that it impacted disproportionately minorities. What's your response to that?
Well, it did. The question is, what was the motivating factor for that? The reality is that the majority, certainly significant majority of violent crime happens in communities of color in this city and in other cities as well. The police are there because they're called there by the people who live in the community. So it is a complicated issue. The litigation that terminates in 2013 actually starts in 1999, and it goes before Judge Sinlin. Now, it was a case that, I don't want to give too much information because people's eyes roll over when I start to, or glaze over, I should say, when I start to get into all the details. But, so there was an agreement, there was a change in the form, there was training things that were done, and the agreement ends in 2006. The plaintiffs in this case, now the plaintiffs are somewhat fungible, but the entity that brings this action is the Center for Constitutional Rights. The next day, they start another litigation, another lawsuit that ends in a trial that the decision is rendered, I think, in August of 2013. One of the things that came up in the trial, or at least one of the things that we were concerned about, is what constitutes racial profiling? How do you show that? We brought in the RAND Corporation, an organization that's been around for 100 years, to ask them what constitutes racial profiling. They said, well, number one, it can't be arrest data because your arrest practices could be inherently biased. It can't be census data because half the stops would be women, naturally carried to its natural extension. What they recommended that it be the description given by the victims of violent crime, of the perpetrators of violent crime. In other words, government is out of it. I'm a private citizen victim. This is the person who committed the crime, a violent crime. So historically in New York City, certainly in the recent past, the description of the perpetrators have been 69% black, so African American. The stops historically in the NYPD have been, certainly for the last several years, 53% black. So quite a significant gap in it. The judge would not accept the disinformation from the RAND Corporation. I believe it is a valuable tool that should be in the police officer's toolkit. It comes from the common law. It is validated by a Supreme Court case, Terry versus Ohio. It is codified. It's on the books in every state in the union. It authorizes a police officer abroad in a public place who sees suspicious activity, something that rises to the level of reasonable suspicion. If he or she believes that a crime is about to be committed, is being committed, or has been committed, they can intervene. They go and stop that person, ask them what they're doing, and if they're in fear of their safety, they can do a limited pat-down. This is practiced by every police department in the country. It's a fundamental tool. That's what we pay our police officers to do. Now, talking about the numbers, in 2011, now let me say this, when I was a police officer, these records, these forms were seldom used unless there was a problem that made out. What we did was require police officers to make those forms out and to document them because we wanted to know what the people were doing. So there was an increase in reporting, and some of it may have been actual increase, but some of it I think was just better record keeping. 675,000 stops in 2011. Sounds like a lot, but it's less than one stop per patrol officer per week, less than one pat down every 2 weeks.
How many of those led to arrests? Do you know?
Well, yes, about 12%. When you say arrest, action, because it has to do with summonses that are issued or arrests.
Okay.
So about 6% arrests, 6% summonses. So anyway, I think.
But should we be concerned about the fact that in 88% of those cases there was no action taken against
No.
People who
Well, we can talk about it, but again, I mentioned what you can do and why you can do it. One of those areas is a crime that's about to be committed. So people use the term, they're totally innocent. Well, in the book, I talk about an example of someone going down the street and trying car doors. Now, in theory, that person could own all those cars, but pretty unlikely that they do. So that's suspicious activity. You go over and you talk to that person. Now, no crime has been committed, no crime in trying the doors. The person walks away, which, by the way, someone was just shot and killed, I guess it was yesterday, in Brooklyn when they tried to intervene with somebody who was going down the street trying car doors. So you have to sort of factor that in, the deterrent effect of this practice. And let me add something else. Yeah. The stop rate here was less than what it was in Philadelphia, in Baltimore, significantly less than it was in Chicago, and less than it was in Los Angeles.
And when you say that, what do you mean, percentage-wise?
Yeah, it has to be based on population. You have to norm for population.
Okay. What do you make of the fact that there have been so many high-profile cases in the news in the last couple of years involving the police and killings that have been alleged to have been based on race? And without getting into the details of each and every case, from Trayvon Martin, Garner case, Walter Scott.
Or Trayvon Martin was not a police officer, but
right. Sorry. Correct. But in the vast majority of the other cases that have been in the news, why do you think that that's become so? Are there more of them happening? Is it because there's more cell phone cameras out there?
That's a very good question. I know it's a cause for concern, certainly for police chiefs throughout America. But there is this phenomenon where everybody over 10 years of age has a camera, de facto camera in their phone. So there's a lot more video, and unfortunately, some people will look at the horrendous event of the murder of Walter Scott at North Charleston, South Carolina, where police officers sort of casually shoots him in the back and then appears to plant evidence on him and say, that's suspicious confirmed. We know it's going on, and look, we just happen to capture this with the camera. Now, in my experience, of course, I don't think that's the case, but I understand people taking that position. So as a result of that, police have to regain trust. From my vantage point in 43 years in the department, I would say that the relationship, general relationship, is much better in recent years than it was certainly when I started. There's a lot of interaction. The department is much more diverse. As a matter of fact, as a result of our aggressive recruitment efforts, there are police officers in the NYPD born in 106 countries. No other police department in the world can come close to that. So a lot of good things have happened. I believe I understand the feelings that people have. That's why I support the concept of cameras.
You support cameras?
I do.
Right.
I do, because a lot of these videos that you see sort of start in the middle of some incident. You don't see the whole picture. At least with police officers wearing cameras, you have the potential for seeing the entire event. And I believe you'll see a lot more, heroic, beneficial, good work on the part of police as a result of those cameras. But also we'll see inappropriate conduct. And I think that whole notion, that train has left the station. Police departments have to embrace the concept of officers wearing cameras.
And do you think it'll make police officers, quote unquote, behave better?
I think it'll make them hesitate. That could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing. Depends on where you stand. And we'll have to see. But do I think you'll see less inappropriate conduct? Yeah, I mean, these are, people with some common sense. They're not going to do things if they had a tendency to do something that was against the law or inappropriate, if in fact it's being recorded. It depends on how you store that information, who has access to it, does the police officer have access to it. There's lots of problems attended to it. And it's an expensive undertaking, but I think it's an idea whose time it's come.
So in the news, quite a bit has been about the fact that the NYPD is now sort of retraining its officers in certain ways. In particular, with regard to what happens if there's an incident, about the reports they have to file, et cetera. What do you make of that?
First, let me say this as far as training. The NYPD, under my watch, was the first major police department to be accredited by the Commission on Law Enforcement Accreditation. We started it in 2002 and finished in 2006, putting a structure in place. Every 2 years, then it is renewed, the examination of training. We accredited our training. This organization was started in 1979 by 4 major police organizations: the PERF, the Police Executive Research Forum, the International Association of Police, the NOBLE, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, are 3 of them. So it is a very well done, comprehensive drill down on the training. Now, I haven't heard a word about this from this administration. The fact that assessment, basically an ongoing assessment. Now, I think you're talking about 2 different things. You're talking about training, but you're also talking about reports, additional reports.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of signals sent to police officers, certainly in the 22 months of the DeBlasio administration. And those signals are primarily step back, don't get involved. And the more reports that you require, less likely police officers are going to engage. These are civil servants. They're going to receive their salary, irrespective of the activity that they take. That's just the real world. So if you have all the paperwork requirements, if you have a requirement for giving a receipt to the people, they may, in and of themselves, some of them may be sound. The overall reaction is going to be, I'm going to step back. And I don't know ultimately what the consequences of that will be. I don't think it's good, but we'll have to wait and see.
How do you think Commissioner Bratton's doing?
I have said that the lead law enforcement person in this city, or any city, is the mayor. That's who sets the tone. That's who sets the trend. You get the policing that the mayor wants. The commissioner has a boss. I had a boss. And if things are not going well, he'll tell you to change it. So that's where the tone, the approach of police come from, not just in New York, but in any city.
Let's talk more broadly about drug offenders, for example, getting these days more lenient sentences. Many have been released. What are your thoughts on that?
I think generally it's a good thing. I think de facto what has happened is drug offenders have been sentenced much more lightly, if that's the word, in the recent past, and that's happened in the courtrooms. And what you see, the people incarcerated now, for the most part, certainly in state prisons in America, are people there for violent crimes. And less so do you see people with drug offenses. But the drug offenses you do see are individuals that are leading major networks, distribution networks, that sort of thing. And they themselves also lead to violence. But generally speaking, I know the federal government is about to release 6,000 federal prisoners. Now, they have all been in prison for 10 years or more. They've made a case to a judge, and it sounds to me like that is a move in the right direction. I would not do it for money. I don't think that's the reason to do it, because there's a social cost, there's an economic cost tied to people who commit crimes being out and about in the public domain. But we'll have to see too what the effects of the 6,000 released people will be, and I think there is a structure to sort of monitor that.
In your book, there are some great pictures in the middle of you throughout your career and your life, and some of them with you as a young man, and I pointed out to you before, looking, I thought, a lot like your son Greg does these days.
I have Jim Kelly in the audience. by
Yeah,
the way. I don't
yes,
want to
yes,
leave him out.
yes. But well, the funny thing is, I've known Greg a long time, and I was looking at some of these pictures and thinking, wow. And I see you sitting in sort of this old school police car, et cetera, back in the day.
With my son Jim.
With your son Jim.
In this precinct, or was in this precinct, by the way.
Well, before I ask you this question, you told me a story earlier about something that had happened in this building when you were a police officer.
Right.
That is, do you remember the year-ish? You didn't mention to me the year.
The 70s.
70s, okay.
Early
It's
70s.
sort of an amazing story.
I was a sergeant in anti-crime work, which is plainclothes work in this precinct. I was riding in a taxi cab that we use for patrol. I was in the back, police officer in the front. And I wanted to use the men's room, so we stopped here. I got out of the cab, went in and used the facilities. I come out and I open the cab door, and on the other side of the cab is someone opening the other door carrying a television set that he had just burglarized from the building next door, an apartment. We actually had other property on him. We obviously searched them, went over, found the door that he had broken into, and arrested him. So that's my 92nd Street West.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of, I've heard a lot of bad things about this place. But when you talk about the 70s, for example, I mean, you grew up in New York. You look at these old pictures of you in New York. As a lifelong New Yorker, has New York changed for the better?
Well, when I was a boy, I was born literally right across the park from where we are now, 91st Street and Columbus Avenue. I talk about it in the book. It was it's sort of a multicultural neighborhood. A lot of people in our building, professors from Columbia University, people born in Norway, in Ireland, in Italy. We saw sort of elements of the West Side Story happen when a large influx of people from Puerto Rico came in. There was a lot of fighting that took place as a result. We moved to Queens. My father didn't want me to be involved in a lot of this activity, so that's why we moved. I was the youngest of five children. Then in the 60s, we had, and I was in the police department, we had sort of this wave of heroin that strikes, particularly just a little bit north of here in East Harlem. Then you had sort of a wave of cocaine. In 1971, there were 15 police officers killed in New York. And the police department shot and killed 93 people that year. I mean, these are, amazing numbers now. And then we had, crack cocaine in the sort of in the late 80s. We had high crime, and then things started to get better. And I think I certainly have to I do credit in the book Mayor Denkins, but I certainly credit Mayor Giuliani in that regard. So the city certainly has gotten better from those days, the sort of drug days that I remember well because I was on the streets here. Again, I'm proud of what happened on the Bloomberg administration watch. We had the lowest number of murders. We had the lowest number of police shootings. We had the lowest number of shootings in 2013, the last year of the Bloomberg administration.
Is there something beyond statistics that you're most proud of? Was there an incident? Was there a moment? Was there a bust? Was there something while you were police commissioner that you look back on and you say, I'm incredibly proud of the numbers. I'm incredibly proud of what we did. But boy, if you were going to ask me about the moment that I had the most pride in what we had done as a police department, is there a moment?
Well, when you say what we had done,
Meaning you
I was going to say being appointed twice as police commissioner, but at what we had done, we set up a sort of a rubric of the 3 C's, we call it, crime suppression, counter-terrorism, community relations. And I can't say there's one moment, but that overall result, I think, at the end of 12 years in office, which isn't awfully a long time. We never had a successful terrorist event, although there were 16 plots talked about in the book. Crime, as I say, was at record lows, shootings at record lows. And I talked to you before about the approval rating of the department on the Bloomberg watch. 70% approval rating, with all the things that police are required to do. I think that's pretty significant. So those sort of three categories is something I'm personally proud of. I know Mayor Bloomberg is proud of as well.
You also talk about your time as a beat cop, about some of the arrests you made in New York. You go through stories about, being in this area and that area and different incidents. Any particular incident, a moment that you look back on and you are, pride may be the wrong word, but it might be the right word. When you look back at your career as a beat cop, is there one or two incidents, because there are a lot here in the book of descriptions, is there one which you think maybe personifies who Ray Kelly is?
I don't know about that, but my first arrest, I was in the police academy. I was we were signed in those days in blue uniforms and given guns, even though we were still students in the academy. I was on 4th Street in Greenwich Village. I was in a doorway, and two men walked down the street, and I hear a bang, a large bang, 4 o'clock in the morning. I hear a bang, and a woman screams, and I run out, and able to, I see a sort of shotgun on the ground. I grab the two men who were there, were trying to run, and then another rookie cop comes along. We put a tourniquet on this woman's leg. She's shot with birdshot. Now, she says that they did it intentionally. They said that they did it.
Followed a fight, where there was some altercation in a bar or something?
Altercation in the bar.
Yeah.
And, there was something going on as they walked down the sidewalk. But this is my first arrest. This is when I was in the police academy. So, I remember that. There's been many of them. I talk about it in the book just to give an indication of what things were like in the 70s. In the next precinct up, actually, was part of this precinct. But it was uniquely situated so that you had some of the poorest people in the city and very wealthy people in the same precinct. So 1 month, my little team of officers in plain clothes using taxi cabs, that sort of thing, observed 27 robbery arrests. In other words, people forcibly taking property from another person. That's what a robbery is. That's a phenomenal number. And what it does is show the street conditions that existed in those days. I mean, today, that number would just be off the charts. So the city has improved tremendously. Obviously, my focus is on crime, but I think it's improved in a lot of ways, and it's no other city like it in the world.
You talk a little bit about your time as Undersecretary of Treasury. I think people sometimes may either overlook or forget that time in government. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I was asked by Bob Rubin to become the Undersecretary of the Treasury. In those days, the Treasury Department had about 40% of federal law enforcement in it. Secret Service, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, U.S. Customs Service, all of the training for law enforcement was done, with the exception of the FBI, was done in the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, all of this sort of a conglomerate of agencies. So I was asked to run that. And one of the things, ironically, that surfaced in U.S. Customs, and I ultimately demoted myself to become the Customs Commissioner, was the issue of personal search, not unlike the stop and frisk issue. The allegations were that people were being stopped based on their race coming into the United States. Now, there's a different standard of proof that you need to search someone at the border, to search someone. All you need is mere suspicion, which is less than reasonable cause.
So it can be completely unreasonable suspicion.
Exactly. Yeah. So we had 90 lawsuits when I went there. So I had to do something about it. I put together a commission. Constance Newman was an African-American woman. She was terrific. She was the head of the Smithsonian Institute. I asked her to help, but put together other people, because there were, quite frankly, no rules, or very few rules or regulations in the Customs Service as to who to stop, when to stop them, to record it, that sort of thing. So we put a structure in place. We added supervision, record keeping, that sort of thing. The number of stops were reduced 75%. The drug fines were increased by 25%. So clearly the procedure helped, and that's one of the things that I was, very proud of, and a host of other things. I thought working in the Clinton administration was a great experience. As Undersecretary, I saw President Clinton up close, very, very impressive, very intelligent.
Well,
when as a Customs Commissioner, less exposure to that.
I was going to say, and you also seemed appreciative in your book of President Clinton during Mayor DeBlasio's inauguration.
Yeah.
Because you kind of blast Mayor DeBlasio in the book. Maybe blast too hard? I think it's fair.
It's common sense. We had this. I've never seen a mayor or any elected official treated like Mayor Bloomberg was at that inauguration. He's a man that arguably, did a tremendous job, certainly in my opinion, and he was insulted to his face. It was a no-class thing to do. I mean, even if it was even remotely deserved, you don't do it. But it certainly wasn't deserved by Mayor Bloomberg, and it was in the amateur hour. And President Clinton said some nice things about Mayor Bloomberg, but it's pretty tough to sit there for an hour and take that sort of abuse.
Yeah, you mentioned in the book that you actually watched it, I think, after the fact.
Yeah, I did. I did watch it.
You were sorry. You then say in the book that you were sorry. You then watched it. If we have questions, I think they're taking around questions. So whenever we get those questions, we'll begin to take some of those. So all of you can weigh in. What is your hope that when people read? Thank you. When people read this book, the sort of the takeaway for them will it be that they understand your legacy?
First of all, I think it's an entertaining book. I think
it is.
I've read it. It's an easy read. We wanted to make it a
and it's opinionated, which is great.
Yeah, we don't hold too much back.
Yeah, no.
And I think it's sort of, in a way, a walk through history in New York City. I think it's insight into government, how government works. For instance, the story about moving the building, the World Trade Center site, Tower 1. People obviously haven't read the book, but there was this juggernaut of support for a new Freedom Tower. It was going to be right on the corner of Vesey and West Street, which is very dangerous. We thought it was ill-advised, but we really couldn't get people to listen to us. I brought in a panel of experts and talked to the developer and his experts. And basically, the people that I had from the CIA and other agencies guaranteed that the building would be attacked in 10 years if, in fact, it hadn't been, the design and the location of the building were not changed. It wasn't that easy, but ultimately, the building was moved, and it was hard. And the first 20 stories of Tower 1 now basically have no occupancy, and it's there just as a pedestal. So that's just one of the little anecdotes and stories in there. So I think it gives an insight into government. It gives a little bit of the history of policing in New York City, and it gives some prescription for the future, how the relationship between the police and the community that it serves can be strengthened.
First question. Thank you for encouraging surveillance cameras. Do you think New York is lax using cameras? Some don't work, hard to detect, ?
Surveillance cameras, there's sort of two types in a way. I mean, there are public surveillance cameras. We put them in significant numbers, starting really with the 1.7 square miles south of Canal Street. 2 successful terrorist attacks there. We put in something called the Lower Manhattan Security Initiative. And now it has many cameras, detection devices, license plate readers, and also located there is the Lower Manhattan Security Coordination Center, which has police officers and representatives from the private sector all in the coordination center to monitor what's going on there, monitor those cameras. The reality is that many of those cameras that are sort of brought in there are private sector cameras that we just linked into. We have an agreement with the owners of those cameras. We've done the same thing the department's done the same thing in Midtown Manhattan. So there is an increasing number of surveillance cameras. When a crime happens, the first thing the detectives do is look for cameras, and there are an increasing number of cameras. They've become a major crime-fighting tool. So the gist of the question seems to indicate that maybe there's a reduction of cameras or whatever. That's not my belief. I think they're here to stay. The cameras have, generally speaking, come down in price, so it means that people and businesses will be more likely to use them.
Ray, how can we stop mass shootings?
Yeah, that's a very, very tough issue. If we have a universe of about 300 million guns, we're told, if we have perhaps 40 million people with significant mental issues, if you're able to get guns easily and legally, which if the last shooting in Oregon, he had 14 guns that he obtained legally. You take all of that and mix it together. Unfortunately, I think we're still going to have these mass shootings.
Would gun control make a difference, you think, in preventing these mass shootings?
Not in this last case. I mean, I think reasonable gun control, but again, they were obtained legally. Now, Adam Lanza, who did the shooting at the Sandy Hook School District in Connecticut, in essence, used his mother's guns, she illegally obtained. So even you're going to have, because of the Second Amendment and because of the Heller decision in the city of Washington by the Supreme Court, Heller says, in essence, Heller takes a look at the Second Amendment, and some people I would interpret it as being a well-armed militia. That's how it starts off. The Second Amendment basically is interpreted by the Supreme Court to authorize individuals to have weapons, but it doesn't preclude government from having some reasonable regulation. So as long as that decision is out there, it's going to be out there for a long time. You're going to have people licensed to have guns in this country. So, I mean, that's the core of the problem. I don't see any easy way to address it. And again, if we stop manufacturing guns tomorrow, you'd have this 300 million guns that are out there. So unfortunately, I think I'm pretty optimistic about a lot of things, but in terms of mass shootings, I think they're going to continue, because also there is this publicity attended to it. Now, the sheriff out in Oregon, he didn't want to put out the shooter's name. I think, he may have some merit.
And then the media, a bunch of the media organizations refused to use his name as well. Does that?
Well, the shooter himself talked about getting publicity in the notes that he left behind. So, it's something to do, not the panacea by any means.
What do you think of presidential candidate Ben Carson saying about rushing the shooter versus doing nothing?
Yeah, well, I think that he's gotten some heat from that from people who were in the room, who were there and thought it was inappropriate. I think you really you need your wits about you. But I would say this: the 3 Americans that were on the train in France that tackled that person, they saved probably hundreds of lives. This guy used the most ubiquitous weapon in the world, an AK-47 semi-automatic rifle. He had 9 magazines with him. He could have gone down that train, and when it's a loud report, so people are backing off when you pull a gun. He could have walked through that train almost in a leisurely fashion and killed a lot of people. So I think you kind of have to be there before you make a statement saying that
this is what you would have done. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, politically, I think it was a pretty dumb thing to say, but but look, I can say that. And I'm not running for mayor in 2017. All right. Why is there no officer corps in the NYPD?
It's just not the tradition of policing. In the military, of course, you have people who start as officers. and you get commissioned officer. I did that. I became a second lieutenant. Then you rise up. It doesn't exist in U.S. policing. It doesn't exist in Canadian policing. I was just there yesterday, and it's not something that's going to take place. These are civil service positions. Now, what I say in the book is, I think every police officer in America should have a 4-year college degree. I say that because the job has become a lot more complex, a lot more demanding, and I would like to sort of change or elevate the pool, the universe of where police officers come from.
Does that mean we elevate pay as well?
Absolutely, it's going to cost to do it. But if you think about it, virtually every teacher in America is required to have a 4-year baccalaureate degree. Yet we give police officers tremendous power. We give them literally the power of life or death, and we demand a lot from them. So I think it's reasonable to demand a higher educational level. In the NYPD, only 60 college credits are required. You can get it in various ways.
I'm going to ask you a question that maybe people in the audience know. I don't even know the answer to this question, which is exactly how long is the training process to become a New York, from the time you get accepted into the New York City Police Department until you become an officer? How long is that process?
Well, this schooling lasts 6 months.
Okay.
And then there's field training officers, there's field training experiences. We had an impact program, we called it, where you have training that continues.
So it's 6 months of just learning and
Yeah.
taking classes and
Yes.
Yeah.
Now there's a probationary period of 2 years, so that you have obviously more leverage, more leeway in removing somebody if it's less than 2 years. After 2 years, then it becomes much more difficult. So the concept is that you identify your problems or people that should be hired in the first 2 years.
And during that probationary period, are they being supervised by someone?
Yeah.
How does it work?
They're being supervised, and there's also evaluations that have to be done. There's a final evaluation, there's a final medical exam.
Are there a lot of people who lose that position during the 2 years?
Not many. No, I mean the people who self-select, people who leave, but not many that are terminated.
A cyber attack, is it a question of when versus if?
Yeah, I'm very concerned about it. We have not seen, the question implies a cyber terrorist attack. And yeah, I think that's a very real possibility. We see ISIS with their pretty high level of sophistication as far as the use of social media is concerned. The reality is that it's very difficult to defend yourself from a cyber attack. Offensively, we can do a lot as a country. We can shut down country X. The problem is defending ourselves, defending our companies, defending our own government information, as we've seen.
You mentioned ISIS. Do you think that ISIS is now more of, I mean, you were dealing primarily with the threat of Al-Qaeda, and we were talking about Al-Qaeda all the time, and ISIS was sort of coming up, I guess, at the end of your term. But do you view ISIS as a greater threat?
I see it as a distinction without a difference. Al-Qaeda, they want to come here and kill us. I mean, that's the reality of it. And do it in different ways. You see ISIS right now as being an inspirational force, a movement. Because you see things like, for instance, police officers were attacked in Jamaica, Queens with a hatchet. That individual and other individuals were motivated by someone by the name of Mohammed al-Dini, who was the communications director, if you will, of ISIS, putting out the word, let 1,000 flowers bloom, do what you can. And that is really, I think, the threat that we face here. Now, it's going to get more sophisticated, but there is this constant barrage of recruitment videos on the internet to sort of get the disaffected young people, not only men, but mostly men. And the sort of the crux of the campaign is that the Ummah, the Muslim world, religion, is under attack. And you have to defend your religion. And you do what you can do. Ideally, you go and you join a caliphate. You go to Syria, Iraq, whatever. But if you can't do that, do it here. So this is sort of barrage of this recruitment effort. Very well done, slickly done. And they're putting out about 90,000 tweets or retweets a day. A lot of information out there. And they continue to motivate people to do strange things, or at least to plan to do.
And are you at all worried about sort of any, some say that, certain actions the United States takes leads them to become more susceptible to being recruited? They become angrier, they become more disaffected. You buy it?
Well, that's what they use in the films. And Abu Ghraib was a treasure trove of films and activities for them. They still very much mention it. And in a lot of these recruitment films, you'll see the Twin Towers. You'll see the World Trade Center towers. They're proud of what they did in New York. They'll bring up the atrocities, real or imagined, and they'll show them. So that is sort of the core of what they're what they're asking people to react to.
Let me just ask you one final question about the book. Was it cathartic for you to be able to sort of put it all down?
Yeah, in a way. I'm not that great on reflection, and I had to do that. I think I learned a little bit about myself. I'm sorry?
You had people pushing you and helping you get there?
Yeah, and asking people, do you remember this, do you remember that? Some of these things go back a long way. But I'd say ultimately it was an enjoyable experience. I had Ellis Hennigan help me with this. He's a terrific guy. He did a great job. But it was hard work. But you feel like you've accomplished something.
Before I tell people about the signing, let me just, on a personal note, just tell you what an honor it is to sit on the stage with you. Your service to the country, your service to the city is almost unparalleled by anyone out there, and it is an honor for me to be able to sit next to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And for those of you who would like to also sit next to him, or at least stand next to him and get a signed copy of the book, there's going to be a book signing next door of Vigilance, so please join Commissioner Kelly there for a book signing. And thank you all very much.
Thank you. Good job. Thanks.
My pleasure.